Before the story begins, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss more emotional and surprising stories ahead. And now let's dive into today's story. Evelyn, I didn't realize thrift stores carried evening dresses now. My daughter-in-law said loudly enough for 3 nearby tables to hear, and by the time dessert arrived, every person in that restaurant was staring at her instead of me. I just smiled and adjusted the silver bracelet on my wrist, while the waiter carefully poured sparkling water into my glass. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The restaurant Jason had chosen for his 42nd birthday sat on the north side of downtown Chicago. All dark wood walls, soft jazz music, and low amber lighting that made everyone look younger and wealthier than they probably were. Crystal glasses reflected the candlelight across the white linen tablecloth, while servers moved quietly between tables carrying expensive steaks on black iron plates. Claire loved places like this. Places where people glanced at handbags before faces. Places where appearances mattered more than kindness. I arrived 10 minutes early because I've always believed being late to dinner is disrespectful. My navy blue dress hung softly past my knees, simple but elegant, with long sleeves and tiny pearl buttons near the collar. I'd owned it for years. The fabric had softened with time, but the stitching remained flawless. I remember running my fingers over the sleeves before leaving home, wondering briefly if I should wear something newer. But this dress always made me feel like myself. Graceful. Comfortable. Invisible in the best way. Claire arrived last, of course. She swept into the restaurant wearing a cream-colored designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, while she kissed the air near people's cheeks instead of actually touching them. She carried herself like a woman constantly waiting for someone to photograph her. "There's the birthday boy," she said brightly, wrapping her arms around Jason before finally turning toward me. Her smile stiffened slightly when she looked at my dress. I noticed it immediately. Claire had perfected the art of silent disapproval years ago. We all sat down while waiters filled water glasses and handed out menus bound in dark leather. Lily sat beside me scrolling through her phone beneath the table, occasionally smiling politely whenever I asked her about college. Jason looked exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that settles into a man after years of trying to keep peace between two women who barely tolerate each other. For the first 20 minutes, dinner remained pleasant enough. We talked about traffic, weather, Lily's classes, Jason's new office renovation. Then Claire ordered a bottle of wine with a price tag that made me quietly fold my menu closed. "Oh, Evelyn," Claire suddenly said, tilting her head while examining me across the candlelight. "I almost forgot to ask where you found that dress." Her voice carried sweetness the same way spoiled milk carries sweetness. I looked up calmly. "I've had it a long time." Claire laughed softly and took a sip of wine. "Well, vintage is definitely trending right now. Honestly, I didn't even realize thrift stores had pieces this formal anymore." The table went silent. Not dramatic silence. Worse. The uncomfortable kind where silverware slows down, and people suddenly become fascinated by their plates. Jason cleared his throat without saying anything. Lily's eyes lifted quickly toward her mother. I simply folded my napkin carefully across my lap. Claire smiled wider, mistaking silence for victory. "I mean, it's actually kind of charming," she continued. "Very humble. Very practical." I nodded once and reached for my water glass. Across the restaurant, an older gentleman seated near the bar suddenly stopped mid-conversation and stared directly at me. Or more specifically at my dress. His expression changed instantly. Not amusement. Recognition. The man slowly rose from his chair near the bar without taking his eyes off my dress. He looked to be somewhere in his late 70s, tall and lean with silver hair combed neatly back and a charcoal suit that fit him too well to be rented. Conversations around us continued softly, but I noticed him weaving carefully between tables with the kind of confidence people only carry after years of being listened to. Claire noticed him too. At first, her expression brightened slightly, probably assuming he recognized her. Claire always assumed attention belonged to her. But the moment he stopped beside our table, he looked directly at me. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I hope I am not interrupting, but may I ask you something?" I set my water glass down carefully. "Of course." He smiled faintly. though there was something emotional behind it. Did you design that dress yourself? For a second, nobody moved. Even Claire seemed caught off guard. I looked down at the navy fabric resting softly across my lap. A long time ago, I answered quietly. His face changed immediately, almost like relief washing through him. I knew it, he whispered. Margot Whitmore taught my mother how to sew a hidden shoulder seam exactly like that in 1983. Claire let out a short laugh before anyone else could speak. Oh my goodness, she said, lifting her wine glass. So now the dress has a backstory too? The man ignored her completely. His attention remained on me. You are Evelyn Whitmore, are you not? Jason slowly turned toward me. Mom. I had not heard that name spoken aloud by a stranger in years. Not since before my husband got sick. Not since before life became smaller and quieter, and centered entirely around everyone else's needs. I nodded once. The gentleman smiled warmly. I cannot believe this, he said softly. My mother adored your work. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Wait, she interrupted, forcing another laugh. You are talking like she was famous or something. Lily looked up from her phone for the first time all evening. The gentleman finally glanced toward Claire, polite but cold. Your mother-in-law was respected by many people once. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I could hear forks resting against porcelain plates at nearby tables. Claire's posture stiffened while Jason frowned slightly, trying to piece together information. He clearly never knew. I folded my hands quietly in my lap. That was a very long time ago, I said. Still, the man replied, people do not forget craftsmanship like this. He pointed gently toward the sleeve of my dress. Look closely at the stitching near the cuff. Hand finished. Nearly impossible to find anymore. Lily leaned closer immediately, curiosity replacing discomfort in her eyes. Grandma, you made this? I smiled faintly. Yes. Claire took another sip of wine too quickly this time. Well, she muttered, that explains why it looks old-fashioned. But her voice sounded thinner now, less certain. The gentleman ignored her again. Please forgive me, he said to me. My name is Arthur Bennett. My family owned Bennett Apparel downtown for over 40 years. I recognized the name instantly. Anyone in Chicago fashion circles from the 1980s would have. Arthur reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and carefully removed a business card. I would be honored if you allowed me to buy you coffee sometime, he said. There are people who would love to know you are still designing. Claire stared at the card in his hand, and for the first time that evening she looked nervous. Claire stared at Arthur Bennett's business card like it might suddenly disappear if she blinked long enough. The confidence she carried into that restaurant had begun slipping in tiny pieces, though she tried desperately to hide it behind another polished smile. Bennett Apparel? Jason asked slowly, finally recognizing the name. Arthur nodded once. Your mother worked with some of the best textile artists in Chicago during the early 1980s. Jason looked at me with confusion that almost hurt more than Claire's earlier comments. Mom, he said quietly, you never told me any of this. I smoothed the edge of my napkin against the tablecloth before answering. There were more important things at the time. Claire let out a nervous little laugh. Well, I mean lots of people so. That does not exactly make someone Coco Chanel. Arthur's expression cooled immediately. Mrs. Whitmore did not simply sew. His voice remained calm, but the room around us seemed to sharpen after he spoke. She designed custom evening wear long before fast fashion turned elegance into disposable clothing. Claire crossed one leg over the other and glanced around the table as if searching for support. Jason stayed silent. Lily, meanwhile, had stopped pretending to check her phone entirely. She looked fascinated now, curious, almost proud. Wait, Lily said softly, looking at me. You design dresses professionally? I smiled faintly at her. For a while. Arthur chuckled under his breath. That is a very modest way to describe it. He carefully gestured toward my sleeve again. Your grandmother once created a winter collection that sold out in less than 2 weeks. Women lined up outside Marshall Fields during a snowstorm. Claire blinked hard. Seriously? She asked before she could stop herself. Arthur nodded. I still remember the navy velvet coat from 1984. My mother talked about it for years. I lowered my eyes toward the candle flickering beside my plate. I had not thought about those days in a very long time. Not because I wanted to forget them, but because life slowly trained me to stop mentioning them. After my husband became sick and Jason was in and out of hospitals as a child, fashion sketches turned into grocery lists and fabric orders turned into medical bills. Dreams shrink quietly when people depend on you. Mom, Jason said again, softer this time. Why did you stop? I looked at him for a moment before answering honestly. Because you needed me more than strangers needed beautiful dresses. The table fell completely silent after that. Real silence this time. Even Claire did not know what to say. Lily's eyes lowered immediately, almost embarrassed on behalf of the entire family. Arthur looked at me with the kind of respect that feels unfamiliar after years of invisibility. People still remember your work, he said gently. More than you realize. Before I could answer, a woman from 2 tables away suddenly approached us holding her phone carefully against her chest. She looked to be in her early 30s, stylish but nervous. I am so sorry, she said quickly. But are you Evelyn Whitmore? Claire's shoulders stiffened beside Jason. I nodded politely. The young woman smiled in disbelief. My mother saved one of your magazine covers from 1985, she said. She used to tell me your designs made ordinary women feel elegant. Claire's face lost color so gradually it almost looked like candlelight fading. The young woman glanced toward my dress and shook her head softly. I cannot believe you still have this piece. It is beautiful. Claire slowly set down her wine glass without taking another sip. And for the first time since dinner began, nobody at that table was looking at her anymore. The waiter arrived with the main courses at exactly the wrong moment. Plates landed softly across the table while nobody spoke. The smell of butter and rosemary drifted through the air, but the warmth that usually comes with a family dinner had disappeared completely. Claire adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist and forced a smile that looked painful around the edges. Well, she said lightly, this has certainly turned into a history lesson. Arthur Bennett remained standing beside the table for another moment before answering her. History matters, he said calmly, especially when people sacrifice it for their families. Claire lowered her eyes toward her wine glass. Jason still looked stunned. I could see him replaying years of memories differently now. Small things. The old sewing room in our basement. The sketchbooks stacked inside my closet. The nights I stayed awake hemming dresses for neighbors after his father lost overtime hours at the steel plant. Children rarely notice what keeps a household standing while they are growing up. They only notice what disappears once they become adults themselves. Arthur finally excused himself politely and returned to his table, but the silence he left behind stayed with us. Lily looked at me carefully. Grandma, she asked softly, do you still have your sketches? Claire immediately reached for her water glass. Lily, sweetheart, do not interrogate your grandmother at dinner. But Lily ignored her. I am serious, she said. I want to see them. I smiled faintly. There are probably boxes somewhere in the garage. Jason leaned back slowly in his chair, staring at me with an expression I had not seen since he was a little boy recovering from a fever. Guilt mixed with tenderness. You really gave all of that up? He asked quietly. I looked down at the candle beside my plate. The flame trembled gently whenever someone passed nearby. Life changes, I answered. People make choices. Claire suddenly laughed again, though this time the sound felt forced and thin. Okay, but let us not act like she was secretly running Paris Fashion Week. Nobody smiled. Not even Jason. Claire noticed immediately. Her shoulders tightened beneath the cream-colored jacket she had spent half the evening smoothing proudly. I was joking, she added quickly. Lily finally looked directly at her mother. It was not funny. The words landed harder than Claire expected. I saw it in the way her fingers froze around the stem of her wine glass. Claire was used to controlling the emotional temperature of every room she entered. She knew how to guide conversations, how to embarrass people with polite little comments disguised as humor. But now the room had shifted without her permission. 2 women at a nearby table continued glancing toward me while whispering quietly to each other. One of them even smiled politely when our eyes met. Claire noticed that too. I just meant the dress looked old-fashioned, she muttered defensively. That is all. Old-fashioned is not the same thing as worthless, Lily replied before taking a sip of water. Jason rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw, exhausted. Claire, he said carefully, maybe tonight is not the night. She stared at him in disbelief. You are taking this seriously? He did not answer immediately. Instead he looked toward me again. Really looked. At the navy fabric. The pearl buttons. The silver bracelet his father bought me 30 years ago when we could barely afford groceries. Dad used to say you were the most talented person he ever met, Jason said quietly. I thought he was just being sentimental. I smiled softly at that because Richard had said it often. Usually while standing in the kitchen eating toast at midnight after double shifts. He believed in me even after I stopped believing in myself. Claire pushed her plate away slightly. For the first time all evening, she no longer looked elegant. She looked unsettled, small. And somewhere across the restaurant, I noticed the manager walking toward our table with a strange look of recognition on his face. The restaurant manager approached our table with careful steps, smoothing the front of his black suit jacket before stopping beside me. He looked to be around 50, polished and professional, but the moment his eyes settled on my dress, his expression softened into unmistakable recognition. Ms. Whitmore, he said gently, almost cautiously, I apologize for interrupting your dinner, but I needed to ask if you are the Evelyn Whitmore. Claire closed her eyes briefly like someone developing a headache. I nodded politely. Yes. The manager smiled in disbelief. My mother still owns one of your winter coats. He laughed quietly to himself. She kept it wrapped in plastic for 30 years because she said nobody made clothes beautifully anymore. I lowered my eyes for a second, unsure what to do with so much attention all at once. There was a time in my life when compliments arrived regularly. Before hospitals. Before unpaid bills. Before my world became school lunches, overtime schedules, and trying to stretch one paycheck across 4 weeks. But after enough years pass, people stop seeing the woman you used to be. Eventually you stop seeing her too. You are very kind, I said softly. No, the manager replied. My mother cried when your boutique closed. Claire shifted sharply in her seat. Boutique? She repeated before she could stop herself. Lily turned toward me immediately. Grandma, you had your own store? I smiled faintly. A small one. The manager laughed warmly. Small? There were articles about her in Chicago Style magazine. Jason looked stunned again. Mom, seriously? I could hear something changing in his voice now. Not just surprise. Regret. The kind that arrives too late to erase years of not paying attention. Claire folded her arms carefully. Well, people exaggerate things over time, she said, though even she no longer sounded convinced. The manager politely ignored her. Your mother designed clothing for charity galas, political fundraisers, theater openings. Women waited months for appointments. Lily stared at me with wide eyes. Why did you never tell us any of this? She asked quietly. I looked toward the candle between us, watching melted wax gather along the edge. Because eventually none of it mattered anymore. Jason frowned. Of course it mattered. I smiled sadly at that. Children always believe sacrifices happen naturally, quietly, like electricity behind walls. They rarely understand what their parents gave up until they are old enough to lose things themselves. When your father got sick, I said softly, the boutique was already struggling. Then your asthma treatments became expensive. Something had to go. Jason lowered his eyes immediately. I could almost see memories reconnecting behind his face. The old sewing machine in the basement. Me staying awake after midnight cutting fabric while helping him with science homework. The way I stopped buying new clothes for myself entirely sometime during the 1990s. Claire stared down at the untouched steak in front of her. You never mentioned any of this to me, she muttered. I looked at her calmly. You never asked. That silence landed harder than anything else said all evening. Even the manager glanced away awkwardly afterward. Claire swallowed slowly, blinking at the white tablecloth as though it might rescue her somehow. Nearby tables continued glancing toward us now, though not with pity toward me anymore. Something else. Respect. Curiosity. Recognition. The manager finally smiled warmly. Ms. Whitmore, he said, if you ever decide to design again, There are still people who would line up for your work. Claire let out a quiet breath and reached for her wineglass one more time, but her hand trembled slightly before she could lift it. Claire tried to recover the atmosphere of the dinner the way people try to smooth wrinkles from expensive fabric after the damage is already done. She straightened her posture, forced another composed smile, and lifted her wineglass carefully as if elegance alone could restore control. "Well," she said lightly, "I think we are all making this a little bigger than it really is." Nobody answered her immediately. Even the soft jazz music floating through the restaurant suddenly seemed distant. Jason remained quiet beside her, staring down at his untouched plate while Lily looked at me with growing admiration she no longer bothered hiding. I noticed Claire watching both of them carefully. That seemed to unsettle her more than Arthur Bennett or the manager ever could. She was losing the room. "I mean," Claire continued after a strained laugh, "fashion from 40 years ago cannot exactly matter that much today." Before anyone could respond, another voice spoke from nearby. "Actually, it does." A woman standing near the hostess station stepped toward our table holding a long camel-colored coat over one arm and a leather portfolio against her side. She appeared to be in her 40s, sharp-eyed and elegant in the effortless way people from New York sometimes are. The restaurant manager immediately straightened when he saw her. "Miss Davenport," he said politely. "Good evening." She smiled briefly before looking directly at me. "I thought that was an original Whitmore piece the second I walked in." Claire blinked in confusion. "You know about this too?" The woman gave her a small professional smile. "I am Rebecca Davenport. I work with archival fashion acquisitions for several luxury collectors." Claire's expression slowly changed. "Collectors?" Rebecca nodded once and gently gestured toward my dress. "Pieces like this are extremely rare now." I could feel nearby conversations fading again as people discreetly listened. Rebecca stepped slightly closer to the table, her attention entirely focused on the dress Claire had mocked less than an hour earlier. "Hand-finished evening pieces from Evelyn Whitmore's early collections are almost impossible to find in wearable condition," she explained, "especially originals that have not been altered." Lily's mouth fell open slightly. Jason looked stunned all over again. Claire swallowed carefully. "Wait," she said slowly. "You are saying that dress is actually valuable?" Rebecca gave a soft laugh. "Depending on provenance and preservation, pieces like this can sell for $20,000 or $30,000 at private auction." Claire nearly dropped her wineglass. The silence around the table became almost unbearable after that. I simply rested one hand lightly against my lap while candlelight flickered across the navy fabric everyone suddenly seemed desperate to examine. 30 minutes earlier, Claire had called it a thrift store dress. Now strangers were speaking about it like museum art. "That cannot be serious," Claire whispered. Rebecca opened her portfolio and carefully removed a tablet. After a few quick movements, she turned the screen toward us. An old magazine cover appeared instantly. Chicago Style Magazine. Winter issue 1984. And there I was. Younger. Smiling softly beside a model wearing the same navy silhouette now draped across my shoulders. Jason stared at the image in disbelief. "Mom," he whispered. Lily leaned closer immediately. "Grandma, you were beautiful." I smiled faintly at her innocence. We all looked different at 28. But Claire said nothing. Her face had gone pale beneath the restaurant lighting. I could almost hear memories moving through her mind now. Every backhanded comment about my clothes. Every holiday where she suggested I dress a little nicer. Every subtle humiliation disguised as concern. Rebecca carefully slid the tablet back into her portfolio. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said warmly, "if you ever consider selling any archived pieces, there are buyers who would compete for them." I shook my head gently. "I never kept them for money." Rebecca smiled knowingly. "The truly elegant women rarely do." Claire lowered her eyes immediately after that. And for the first time since I had known her, she looked ashamed. Rebecca Davenport eventually excused herself after leaving her business card beside my water glass, but the energy at the table never recovered. It had shifted too far. The soft confidence Claire arrived with had dissolved completely beneath the restaurant lights, replaced by something fragile and restless. She kept adjusting her bracelet and smoothing invisible wrinkles from her jacket while avoiding direct eye contact with anyone. Jason sat unusually still beside her, his hands folded together near his untouched dinner plate. I could see him thinking. Really thinking. Not about work deadlines or mortgage payments or weekend errands. About me. About years he had apparently never questioned before tonight. Lily finally broke the silence first. "Grandma," she said quietly, "I want to see your designs someday." I smiled softly at her. "Most of them are packed away in old boxes now." "Still," she replied, "I would love to see them." Jason looked at me then with a heaviness in his expression that made him suddenly resemble his father. "I cannot believe I never knew any of this," he admitted. "You used to pick me up from school covered in fabric chalk, and I never even asked why." I gave a small shrug. Children are not supposed to carry their parents' unfinished dreams. Claire let out a nervous laugh that nobody returned. "Okay, I think we are all being a little dramatic now." Her voice sounded thin. Defensive. "I made one joke about a dress." Jason slowly turned toward her. "Claire." She blinked immediately. "What?" "Stop." The single word landed quietly, but it changed the entire table. Claire stared at him in disbelief. "You are seriously upset with me right now?" Jason rubbed one hand across his forehead before answering. "You embarrass my mother in front of everyone." Claire let out a sharp breath. I was teasing her. "No," Lily said softly from beside me. "You were being mean." Claire turned toward her daughter so quickly that even she seemed startled by it. "Excuse me." Lily lowered her eyes for a second before speaking again, quieter this time but firm. "You always do that to Grandma." The silence afterward felt almost painful. Nearby conversations blurred into soft noise while candlelight flickered gently between us. Claire looked around the table like someone suddenly realizing there were no allies left. "Wow," she whispered. "So now everybody is attacking me?" "Nobody is attacking you," Jason replied tiredly. "But maybe tonight showed us something we should have noticed a long time ago." Claire stared at him. "What is that supposed to mean?" Jason exhaled. Slowly. "It means my mother spent her entire life sacrificing things for this family, while we treated her like background furniture." I lowered my eyes immediately after hearing that because somehow those words hurt more than Claire's mockery ever had. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. Claire folded her arms tightly across herself. "I did not know she used to design clothes." "That is not the point," Jason said quietly. "You did not need to know she was famous to treat her with respect." Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again without speaking. Lily reached beneath the table and gently touched my hand for a brief moment. Such a small gesture. But after years of quiet dismissal, it nearly broke my heart. Across the dining room, I noticed several people still glancing toward our table occasionally. Not because of drama anymore. Because stories travel quickly in places like this. Especially stories about forgotten elegance. Claire looked down at the navy dress once more. But this time there was no mockery left in her expression. Only humiliation. And perhaps something even harder for her to accept. Shame. The birthday candles arrived untouched. A young waiter placed the small chocolate cake carefully at the center of the table, smiling politely while sensing the tension he did not understand. Nobody reached for the plates. Nobody sang. The soft piano music drifting through the restaurant suddenly felt strangely distant, like it belonged to another room entirely. Claire sat rigid beside Jason, staring down at the white tablecloth while turning her wedding ring slowly around her finger. I could see her trying to gather herself again, trying to rebuild the polished version of herself she normally presented so easily to the world. But embarrassment has a way of stripping people down faster than anger ever could. Jason leaned back slowly in his chair and looked at me again. "I am sorry," he said quietly. The words surprised even him. I smiled gently. "For what?" He swallowed once before answering. "For not noticing." Claire finally lifted her head sharply. "Jason, enough already." He turned toward her calmly, but there was exhaustion in his eyes. "Now." "No, Claire. Not enough." The table fell silent again. Lily looked between her parents carefully, nervous but unwilling to leave my side emotionally anymore. Claire let out a quiet breath and shook her head. "I made one stupid comment. I said I was sorry. But even she knew that was not true. She had not apologized. Not really. She had defended herself, explained herself, justified herself. Those are not the same thing. I reached for my purse slowly and rested it on my lap. It is late, I said softly. I should probably head home. Jason immediately straightened. Mom, you do not have to leave. I would like to. Claire looked at me then, finally dropping the performance entirely. There was no polished smile left. No social confidence. Only discomfort. Evelyn, she said quietly, I honestly did not mean for any of this to happen. I looked at her calmly for a long moment. For years, I had watched her make little comments disguised as jokes. Comments about my clothes, my house, my old furniture, the way I still clipped coupons sometimes. None of them brutal enough to confront directly. Just enough to slowly remind someone they were considered less important, less polished, less valuable. Tonight had simply been the first time the room stopped agreeing with her. I know, I answered softly. Claire blinked in surprise, almost relieved. But I was not finished. I stood carefully from the table, smoothing the navy fabric gently against my hips while the candlelight flickered across the pearl buttons. Several nearby tables glanced toward us again as chairs shifted softly against the hardwood floor. Claire looked up at me uncertainly. And then I finally said the one thing I had carried quietly inside myself for years. My dress was never the cheapest thing at this table. Nobody moved afterward. Nobody even breathed for a second. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Claire's face lost all color immediately. Jason lowered his eyes. Lily stared at me with open admiration she no longer tried to hide. Across the restaurant, I noticed the manager pause near the hostess stand as if he had heard every word. Claire opened her mouth once, then closed it. Again. There was nothing left to defend. Nothing left to explain away with nervous laughter or polished excuses. Quiet truth leaves very little room for performance. I slipped one arm through the strap of my purse and turned toward the exit. Jason stood quickly. Mom, wait. I touched his arm gently before he could continue. Enjoy your birthday, sweetheart. His eyes looked glassy beneath the warm restaurant lighting. For a moment, he resembled the little boy who used to wait beside my sewing table while I hemmed dresses after midnight. The little boy who once believed his mother could fix almost anything. As I walked past the hostess stand, the manager stepped forward immediately and offered me my coat himself. Ms. Whitmore, he said quietly, it was truly an honor having you here tonight. I smiled politely and slipped my arms into the coat. Thank you. Then I walked out of the restaurant slowly with my head high, while behind me the entire table remained silent. The next morning sunlight spilled across my kitchen table, while I sat quietly with a cup of coffee and a box of old sketches I had not opened in nearly 15 years. Outside my window, Chicago moved through another cold gray morning without caring that something inside me had shifted the night before. But I felt it. A strange lightness. Not victory exactly. Something quieter than that. Relief. For years I had made myself smaller to keep peace inside my family. Smaller opinions. Smaller presence. Smaller needs. Somewhere along the way, people became comfortable treating me like I would always remain quietly grateful for whatever space they allowed me to occupy. Last night reminded all of us that invisibility is not the same thing as worthlessness. My phone rang just after 9 o'clock. Jason. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Good morning, I said softly. He sounded tired. Mom, are you home? Yes. A pause followed. Can I come by? I looked down at the sketches spread across my kitchen table. Pencil lines. Fabric notes. Tiny pieces of the woman I used to be before life interrupted her. Of course, I answered. Jason arrived 30 minutes later carrying coffee and the same exhausted expression from the restaurant. The moment he stepped inside, his eyes landed on the sketches covering the table. He stared at them quietly. These are yours, he asked. Most of them. He picked one up carefully, almost afraid to crease the paper. These are incredible. I smiled faintly. Your father used to say they looked expensive even before they became dresses. Jason lowered the sketch slowly and looked at me with visible regret. I do not know how I missed all of this. I shrugged gently. You were busy building your own life. That is not an excuse. The honesty in his voice surprised me. He sat across from me at the kitchen table where I had packed his lunches for 12 years and helped him study for every science test he ever feared failing. Claire cried after you left, he admitted quietly. I stirred cream into my coffee slowly. I imagine last night was difficult for her. Jason let out a tired breath. She keeps saying she was joking, but I think she finally realized how often she talks down to people. I did not answer immediately. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past the house while winter wind brushed softly against the windows. Sometimes people confuse confidence with superiority, I said carefully. Jason nodded once. Lily has not spoken to her much today. That saddened me more than anything else. Families fracture quietly long before they break loudly. Give it time, I said softly. People can grow if they choose to. Jason looked around my kitchen, then noticed the old sewing machine near the dining room wall. Does it still work? He asked. I smiled for real this time. Mostly. He hesitated before speaking again. You should start designing again. I laughed softly under my breath. At my age. Why not? He asked immediately. Everybody else spent last night reminding us how talented you are. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. I opened the front door to find Lily standing there holding a large paper bag from a bakery downtown. The moment she saw me, she smiled warmly and wrapped her arms around me. I brought cinnamon rolls, she said. Then she lowered her voice slightly. And I really want to see every sketch you have. An hour later, the three of us sat around my kitchen table flipping through old designs while morning sunlight warmed the room. For the first time in many years, nobody treated me like an afterthought. And somewhere between the coffee cups, the faded sketches, and Lily's excited questions, I quietly realized something important. I had spent so much time mourning the life I gave up that I never noticed pieces of it were still waiting for me to come back. And that's the end of today's story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.